Why did Donald Trump start a war against Iran, and how will this war affect Putin? This topic we'll discuss right now. My name is Iryna Uzlova, and today with us is Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channels Rashkin Report in English, Rashkin News. Yuri, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I think that today, like almost never before, it's important to have these kinds of conversations that you and I are having, because there's a big global event, but I think that there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out how this is going to reflect on Putin, on Ukraine, and I look forward to kind of like taking this apart for them. So let's do it.
Yes. A lot of conclusions, reasons, and arguments, and a lot of questions without answers. But we'll try to find it. US President Donald Trump took a huge risk when he decided to attack Iran and eliminate the entire top of the regime. If Trump succeeds in what previous presidents failed to do, to reorganize the Middle East on the eyes of the American military machine, he will declare a historic triumph, BBC reported. However, if the strike fails or escalates into a major war, Trump risks undermining not only the chances of Republicans to retain control of Congress in the November elections, but also his own reputations and historical legacy. Yuri, what are the key reasons why Trump started a war against Iran now, and how do Americans feel about it? And these two scenarios, it's really realistic.
I think that there's a lot of risk, and we don't know how things are going to go today, because the situation is extremely fluid. This is not Venezuela, where once Maduro was arrested or extracted, that was essentially the end of hostilities with Venezuela, and there was no question about Venezuela shooting rockets at anybody else. This was a very limited, surgically conducted operation that turned out to be quite lucky for all involved, including Maduro, who is still alive and sitting in jail in Brooklyn. But the situation with Iran is very different for very obvious reasons. And the United States, I think here we feel that we have not been sold on this war. We are not used to this. We are used to being presented with a case why we need to do this. At least, I don't know, they sunk our battleship, something. But this was all done by a president who decided not to ask Congress for permission, who did not present or make his case to the American people, because, well, it was kind of, he wanted to keep his options open, or it was unpleasant, or he wasn't sure, or whatever, but he didn't. And so as a result, the American people in the United States are not really on board with this at all. We are, and even his base, which is traditionally interested in a show of force, but voted for him specifically because they don't want these kinds of situations where American soldiers are going to be involved and where America will have to pay price. Trump's base is okay and perfectly fine with showing brutality, showing force and brute strength. But if they have to pay for it, no, thank you. And this can be a variety of different outcomes, most of which are not really pleasing Trump's base, who, on top of everything, we're learning that it seems that the reason for this attack was lobbying from both monarchs of the Persian Gulf, starting with Saudi Arabia, and also Israel and Government Netanyahu. And this is going to lead to really negative consequences, I believe, for the perception of all of those countries in the United States. Not that they were in particularly good shape, but they're going to be suffering because this appears to be a situation where the United States is led into military action by its allies. and can't call Israel a new ally for sure. So this is a situation where in America we feel very vulnerable to a president who can do things he feels to be unaccountable for, justified to do, and not required to explain his actions to anyone. This is not a good image for elections if he loses. And everything here, unlike Venezuela, even unlike Iraq, Iran is a different situation in a sense that we don't really know if when we stop, will they stop? Because Trump is discussing all sorts of ways that he can get out of this and he can make the situation go away if he needs to, because that's the modus operandi. If there's a problem, you get out of there, declare a war or declare victory, declare that only an idiot would be there in the first place, like Ukraine. And then you just pretend it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And it's victory. Victory parade. Ta, 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 ta. And what if Iran doesn't stop? Because the idea of regime decapitulation works in some countries better than others. And it's an interesting almost index that I started to think about, because I see that our policies are now, we chop off heads of the regime, and then we deal with the consequences. And it doesn't always work, because it depends on whether there are institutions, whether the state, whether people have agency in there and with society. And there's certain countries where, for instance, in Russia, if you decapitate Russia and you get rid of Putin, you can really get a different policy, very different policy, by putting a different person in their place, because who is going to rise up and object? But in other countries such as United States, where we have a lot of different institutions that are fighting to preserve themselves and the country as a whole, then this kind of decapitation approach doesn't work. And certain countries are in a mix. You have, Iran, which may actually be a good, very important example and precedent for Ukraine, because Trump and Putin are convinced that situation is going to get at least partially resolved if Zelensky is out of there. So what we see with Iran is that when you have one leader who is removed, do the people automatically roll over and say, sure, United States, whatever you want? Or does the situation become more radicalized and opposition becomes hardened? And it actually, now the negotiating might be even more difficult. So I think that decapitation approach is something that is almost, seems like reasonably unique to this administration in a sense of its carelessness and lack of thought. But it will work differently in different countries, and Americans are very concerned that it will backfire when it comes to Iran.
Russian dictator Putin said next words: "Please accept my deep condolences in connection with the killing of the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ali Khamenei, and members of his family, carried out in a cynical violation of all norms of human morality and international law." And these words belong to terrorist number one in the whole world, to Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. So, but what should Putin be preparing for, since this is still an attack on one of the Kremlin's allies, Iran?
Putin is showing himself very, very weak. And that is something that should not be lost when we're discussing the madness or irrationality or rationality approach of this administration in the United States, just how weak and pathetic Putin appears in this whole the situation that we have unfolding in front of us, because he is not able to support his client states. He's showing that his weapons don't work, his diplomacy doesn't work, and he's resorting to the weak democratic language of, oh, this is a violation of laws, and that's not how you're supposed to operate things in, Come on. This is Putin we're talking about. If he could, he would. If he can't, he can't. And words are just things he uses to get his point, to get his means, to get his goals accomplished. And I think that it's very clear that when Putin starts to resort to the language of democracies and laws, it means that he has no strength. He's got no game. He's got no leverage. He's got nothing. And after that, as I recall, they also demanded that United Nations do something, which is another show of weakness, because what is Russia doing here? Oh, it's asking for United Nations help. Oh, poor Russia. If only they were, a little stronger country and wouldn't rely on all the diplomats of United Nations, all the power that they hold, and so it's a weak situation, weak hand that Russia is playing. And why? Because of Ukraine. Because had Russia not wasted all of its resources in Ukraine over the last essentially 12 years, but particularly in the last 4+ years, then Russia would be in a much better position to act as a regional hegemon or world hegemon that it imagines itself to be. Because there's one thing to have game and another thing to express condolences because you don't have game. And I think that's Putin's problem. And I think it's just important to acknowledge every chance we get, the important impact that Ukraine is making on all of this happening, because Iran being weaker, Venezuela being defenseless, Syria being vulnerable, all of those things are the credit goes also to the armed forces of Ukraine for destroying Putin's opportunities to be involved and influence anything anywhere else in the world.
Director of the Center for International Studies, Igor Samyvalov, says that Trump is destroying the Moscow-Tehran axis of the evil, and this axis of evil is falling apart before our eyes. Can you agree with this statement? And will Trump end this story, destroying the regime in Iran at all?
I think that axis of evil is a nice phrase that was coined to describe several countries that are causing a lot of problems all over the world. And we see that there are a couple of countries that are not being subjected to this, and we see that nobody is the axis of evil. The North Korea seems to be doing okay, and Russia seems to be doing okay, and Iran is not. And what was Iran trying to do? Oh, they were trying to get a nuclear weapon. It seems like having a nuclear weapon is a nice defense policy, isn't it? Because if you have nuclear weapons, then, I guess Ukraine. What about that Budapest memorandum? Does anybody remember what happened to that? So I think that all of those kind of conversations bring us back to the fact that the security guarantee for the future is going to lay not in the hands of the United States or Russia or China. It's going to lay in the hands of each individual state and nation and country, because it's going to be investment in it has to be investment in its people. And in case of Ukraine, that means investment in its army, because army is the most important institution in Ukraine at the moment, and will be for the foreseeable future, which means that that's the institution that needs heaviest investment. But there will be others which also deserve heavy investment, and not just in Ukraine, all over the world, because that's investment in our institutions and protection of our institutions is what's going to be the security guarantee against dictatorships arising anywhere. Because if we start talking about nuclear weapons and what weapons we need to have, we just need to give Ukraine a lot of weapons so that Russia would be scared. But guess what? Ukraine is doing amazing things with drones already because it can't afford to wait for the world to get to it. So I think Ukraine is doing amazing things already, and Iran is showing that the evil regimes are vulnerable. I am, when I think about the attack on Iran from the United States, I also think about 57,000 shaheeds that were sent from Russia onto Ukraine, onto Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian civilians. And to me, on that level alone, provided that was actually accomplished, provided most of those shaheeds are not made elsewhere, would be a good reason for the attack, because axis of evil is interconnected. And we see that they are helping each other. But if we start following this chain and we follow the money, it is interesting how everybody seems to be working for China these days, because everybody needs China to make stuff and to provide parts for stuff, and that's everybody. So does it mean that really this is just one big Chinese conspiracy and we are just marionettes and puppets working their evil schemes? Well, not necessarily. But we certainly seem to be using them to make everything, and I think that there's interesting connections that we need to be able to see of where this is all headed. Because axis of evil is a nice phrase, but there's actual actors and beneficiaries of all this madness that we're observing. It's not just nuclear weapons; it's who is providing the parts for the drones. It's where all of this is coming from, and both we see that Russia and Ukraine and others are using China in no matter what they say. So if we were more ethical, more principled, and more self-reliant, then we would be in better shape. But those are security guarantees that create trust. And if there's trust, and we have trust in ourselves, in our communities, in our nation, then that's all the security guarantees we can ever have.
Does this current escalation with Iran risk distracting Trump from other geopolitical priorities like the war in Ukraine, like the process of negotiation around Russian-Ukrainian war?
I think it's pretty clear to Donald Trump that all of his peace efforts have been a gigantic failure. And the question is how to take his attention off of it, and how to get people to stop paying attention to the fact that he said that he was going to end this war in 24 hours. And instead, we see that it's been a long time, way longer than 24 hours. And that's, I think, part of the reason why Donald Trump chose not to speak much about Ukraine during his State of the Union speech, because there's nothing good to talk about there, because all he could say was that if I was president, this wouldn't have happened, and that my predecessor was the worst person ever, although he didn't even mention his predecessor's name. The Russia-Ukraine war has not been a good experience for Donald Trump. He's got a lot of potential to make a lot of money, and there's trillions and trillions of dollars that supposedly he might make, although I think everybody who understands anything understands that there's no such money. You can't sell everything in Russia and get $13 trillion. But to me, this is just a result of how much the communication channel work with Trump. You have to always escalate the number to get him to continue to pay attention. I suggest we just come up with a new number, Trumpillion, and then that would be the amount of money that Trump will make as soon as Russia loses. Russia agrees to a ceasefire, something. But this president is looking for successes. He wants to be with winners, and right now he sees that Putin is stuck, and he would like to help Putin get out, but Putin won't. And so Trump is moving on to other areas where he can make money, where he can make influence, where he can further his influence. And if that means that the world doesn't talk about Ukraine, well, the world talks about wherever Donald Trump is. So if Donald Trump is interested in a war with Iran, then that's what we're going to be talking about. But if he's going to be interested in Ukraine, then we'll be speaking about Ukraine. But the problem with Donald Trump, he doesn't bring good attention. So that's the trade-off. I think that not having Donald Trump in your corner as long as he's not in Russia's corner, is really not a bad thing. He's not an asset. He's more of a liability. But I think this is part of the world. Another thing that Ukrainians, as well as everybody else, needs to get over, as far as counting on the United States to be that garant, the security guarantee for the world, starting with Ukraine. United States can provide security guarantee for anybody, for people inside the United States, for people outside of the United States. And the war that is happening right now is proof to what extent our president cannot give security guarantees to anybody. I believe he gave security guarantee to Qatar. Is it keeping them safe? Are they doing okay over there? Because it sounds like Iran is kind of pissed. So I think that trusting this president and is a big mistake, and he is looking to distract attention from everything that he touches, starting with the Epstein case, because there it sounds like he touched something he really shouldn't have touched.
Talking about security guarantees, the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Kirill Budanov, said that at the last meeting, the Russian side for the first time agreed to the option of security guarantees for Ukraine offered by the United States. At the previous negotiations, the Russian side directly said that they would accept the security guarantees offered by the US to Ukraine, and there would be no getting away from it. They directly say that they would be forced and ready to accept them. According to the head of the office of Ukrainian president, these security guarantees could come into force simultaneously with the declaration of a ceasefire on the front. Budanov also reported that an agreement had been reached with the Russian Federation on the exchange of prisoners in the coming days, and the main question is the territorial issue, and we are looking for a compromise between two absolutely polar positions here. But according to Budanov, security guarantees is the question where we can find some compromise, and as you see, how do you think, Yuri, why did the Russian side agree to security guarantees from the United States if the Russians had previously called these security guarantees unacceptable? And what should be expected from the next round of negotiations in such side?
Putting pressure on Donald Trump doesn't cost Vladimir Putin anything. And I think that for Donald Trump to provide an issuance of guarantee, a piece of paper where we would list what we will do, is relatively easy because he is not really bound by any agreement that he signs or does, because everything can always be renegotiated. So we know that the documents signed by him are not trustworthy. But more importantly, it's just that the security guarantees that he is willing to talk about are based on the assumption that Putin told Trump that Putin is not going to attack Ukraine, and so Trump trusts Putin, as opposed to no matter what Putin does, Trump is willing to defend Ukraine, willing to defend our reputation, his own word. No, he just thinks that Putin is not going to attack. And I think that that's where there's a lot of vulnerabilities, and that's where we see stories and hear stories about people laughing at Trump. And of course, it's short-sighted because Trump is, you're laughing at him now, but he might crush you accidentally tomorrow. But it's clear that as of today, Vladimir Putin has no reason to be worried about Trump, and he seems to manage him quite well. Again, until I see that the United States is willing to put at least 10% tariffs on Russia and take the same tariffs off of Ukraine, I will feel that there is no pressure that's being actually applied to Russia. That is because for Donald Trump, tariffs, this is his favorite thing. I think it's probably tattooed on him somewhere. And if he's not willing to give his most favorite thing to his best friend, then maybe that's something that says something about his priorities, as well as the the portrait of Putin and Trump in the White House. Again, I think that even less than tariffs, forget the tariffs, just take the portrait down. If Trump could just take the portrait down, and so he wouldn't be reminded of him and Putin, but he can't, because again, I feel like there's probably a tattoo of tariffs and there's a tattoo of Putin on Trump, because those are his most precious, most favorite things.
Yes, this portrait and photos and unreal love sometimes from Trump to Putin, but we'll see. Yuri, thank you very much for this conversation, for your explanation, for your thoughts and position. See you next week. Take care.
Take care. Thank you, Iryna.
Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report in English, Rashkin News. My name is Iryna Uzlova. Guys, thank you for watching us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channels and take care. Wish you all best.